Okay, good morning to everyone. Buenos días. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today this morning. And I'm grateful because to be here at the presentation of this initiative here in Spain, in Bilbao, or close to Bilbao. And I think I say I'm grateful because I think that data and big data is one of the most relevant features of the new industrial model we want to build, we want to create. And it's an important part of the so-called fourth industrial revolution. And I am also happy because all this takes place under the coordination and leadership of Spanish firm in Novalia, and the presentation takes place here in Spain. So I think there are two very good results from the Spanish perspective. Okay, in the next minutes, my idea is just to, quite briefly, because I don't have much time, to explain to you a little bit what we are doing here in Spain from the national perspective, and I'm going to focus especially on those areas that are more related to what we are going to talk here this morning, today, here in this conference. Okay, so very briefly I'm going to mention the three challenges that I think the industry has to face nowadays. Secondly, the main lines of action of our strategy, which is called Industria Conectada 4.0. And finally, a couple of words about the governance model, because I think it's very important for the development and for the success of our initiative. So, to the way. Okay, so which are the challenges that, well, not only Spanish industrial sector, I would say that the world's industrial sector has to face, or is going to face in the very near future. I think there are three trends that with which there is a general consensus in the world. Number one is sustainability. I think that today we are already in a transition period toward a decarbonized economy. And so we have to adapt and we have to work for this transition period to be very successful. You know, there are some industries, especially for instance the automotive industry, which is very much concerned about this, and they are already working on it, and precisely to be successful in 10 years, 10 years, or even to fulfill with the targets of 2015, no? According to the climate change and all the targets that in terms of decarbonization have already been set. Number two, technological progress. So I think there is no mystery about it. So we're talking about digitalization. We know that this progress and this process is being very quick and very intense, and so we have to adapt to this new framework. I don't know if we can call it a new industrial revolution, the fourth, the third, or the fifth. That what is true and what is clear is that it's a new scenario that we have to deal with, and so necessarily we have to adapt not only the automotive industry but all kind of industries in Spain and in the world. And number three, perhaps a more conjunctural point, which has to do with the ideas of I would say perhaps a group of countries, and especially one country, in terms of putting some doubts about the globalization process, and also to try to go back to policies that in many cases were already forgotten. And so this kind of attitudes and this kind of policies, how it can affect to the evolution of also the industrial model, is something that I hope is not going to be very, very, very much forward. But anyway, we have to take into account when we are designing and when we are dealing with industrial policy, especially from the ministries. Okay, what we already know is that so we know where we want to arrive, where we are heading. So the final step of our policy should be this smart and connected industry. So we want and we know that we need a more collaborative industry. Innovation is surely a very important part of the equation. Connection, production means have to be connected. Integration supply chains between providers, suppliers, and clients are all together in the same line. And well, digitalization is, as I mentioned, a very important part of all this new scenario. So we are going to have goods and services that are smarter, personalized and customized goods and services as well. And in the end, as we've already seen during these years, new business models are arriving, and more business models, new business models are going to arrive in the near future. So in the end, we want to get to this smart and connected industry, which would be the focus and the most important part of the new industrial model that we want to develop, and that fortunately is going to tackle the challenges that I mentioned before. Okay, so to try to tackle and to face these challenges, what we did in Spain already a couple or almost, 2.5 years ago, was to develop our national strategy that was called Industria Conectada 4.0. This national strategy has 4 major action lines, which are the ones that are shown here in the slide. And I'm going to very briefly mention the 4 of them. Number 1, awareness and training. We know that awareness is very important, especially here, as in many other parts of the initiative. We are talking and we're referring to SMEs. We know that large companies perhaps have another way of facing this challenge, but SMEs are actually part of the industrial model that has to be taken into account very, very deeply. And so we know how important it is for them to be aware of the importance of this process, of how much is at stake, and because that would be the first step in order to begin to take actions to try to face the new scenario. So then, awareness, we are working, very hard with communication measures, all kind of communication measures. I think that little by little, at least the Spanish SMEs are becoming more aware of, as I mentioned, of the relevance of what it's at stake. Training, training is something that, anywhere you talk about Industry 4.0, you're going to talk about training, you're going to talk about education, you're going to talk about skills. So it's something that perhaps we don't have to insist on, because it's really important. The second line of action has to do with collaboration, collaborative platforms and environments. I think that collaboration is one of the, as we've seen before, and we're going to see, I'm sure, during the rest of the morning, is perhaps the most important term that comes together with this Industry 4.0. So we try to promote and foster the creation of environments and new tools that make collaboration between technological and industrial sectors more feasible. And afterwards, I'm going to focus a little bit on this action. The third action line has to do with digital enablers. We want to promote, we want to boost Spanish digital enablers, so we're working on research, development, and innovation with them, funding some of the projects and the activities and initiatives that they have. And what we would like is to have an important supply of digital enablers here in Spain to face the new demands of the industrial sector. And number 4, all of this is very important, but in the end, if you don't get to the companies, and especially if you don't get to the SMEs, I think that you're not going to be successful with your strategy. So our 4th line of action has to do with the implementation, the practical implementation and effective implementation of digitization in our industry, in the Spanish industry. And as I mentioned, and I'm talking along my presentation, especially with small and medium enterprises. So these 4 action lines are detailed in 8 strategic areas, and has to do with what also we have called Industria Conectada 4.0 platform. I'm going to focus a little bit on it, but we want a platform that is a marketplace, because I think that's one of the major features of any platform, but it goes much more beyond. We want to have a general collaborative environment to learn and to test. We want also to provide solutions for SMEs, and also we want a coordination and a collaboration and a connection with other initiatives in terms of platforms within Spain and with the rest of the European Union. And finally, something that already was mentioned, we want to work very closely with this industrial data space in Spain and in Europe. Okay, just going very briefly into these three areas. Digital innovation hubs, basically here we began to work last year on them. We have within our governance model, we have established and we have set a working group that I'm going to mention also a little bit later. But basically here, what we did and with the activities of this working group was firstly to arrange the creation and development of digital innovation hubs in Spain. Actually, today we have already 60. And then we want to coordinate the services and the roles of them. We want to promote collaboration among hubs. I think this is important. Not only collaboration among Spanish hubs, but also collaboration between hubs in Spain and hubs in other parts of the European Union, in other member states. No? And also we have this idea and this goal of have a portfolio, complete portfolio about the services that these hubs are providing to companies. Moving to clusters, to business clusters. Well, here, as you know, the final policy goal, industrial policy goal of these clusters is to try to increase innovation, R plus D plus innovation, when they are dealing with projects. So we want to get this virtuous circle, innovation, competitiveness and globalization all together because we think that they are parts of the same train, of the same process. And also here, underlying everything, there is also this idea of collaboration, and again, collaboration not only within the cluster, but also between clusters. Clusters again in Spain, and between clusters in Spain and clusters in other countries of the European Union. Basically, we are working with two instruments. Number one, what we call a Reconnection Policy, that we work on. The instrument we are using is a register, a cluster register, where we have those clusters that are excellent. So we establish some conditions to be part of the register, and the clusters that comply with them will be part of the register, and so they are called, or they are considered as excellent clusters. And the second instrument has to do with economic support, basically through grants and subsidies. So for this year and next years, we want to focus especially in terms of talking about economic support, also trying to promote collaborative projects. Collaborative projects related to Industry 4.0, and also now related to digital innovation hubs. So this idea of cooperation, as you can see, is one of the mantras, one of the major ideas that we have. We want this intercluster collaboration, both in terms of sectoral and regional perspective. No? And finally, we want to begin this year to work on training with them, to identify which are the needs that they have in terms of capacity building, in terms of training, and ideally to try to solve and to respond to the demands of them, as I mentioned, in terms of skills and in terms of training. Here there are some examples of some clusters that we financed last year. The first of them is basically here based in the Basque Country. Is the Association of Máquina Herramienta, and so we also have worked with IT clusters, and for instance in other sectors like the goods sector or design in Galicia. Okay, and finally the third area I mentioned in this line of action of collaboration of collaborative environments has to do with something I already mentioned, the Industria Conectada 4.0 platform. Here we are working on the design of it. Actually, we want that the attributes that are on the left of the slide are the ones that we want to define the platform: open, collaborative, innovative, cyber secure, scale up, and so forth. Also, we want to provide solutions, as I mentioned, to SMEs, and we want to give a sectoral perspective for this solution, because we think that we should differentiate between sectors when talking about the solutions that could be possible for SMEs. Also, we want the platform to be a marketplace. And well, in the end, so what we need is, of course, that this platform is efficient, that it provides the access to everyone in this ecosystem and in the rest of ecosystems. And of course, we also need a necessary critical mass to make it feasible, to make it efficient. Okay, and just to conclude, I mean, I would like to refer very briefly to the governance model of our strategy. So we have Industria Conectada 4.0. We are very much in line with all the framework already established in the European Union. Francesco mentioned a little bit the priorities and the lines of action that the European Union and basically DG Connect is following. We are in line with them. I mean, we participate very actively in all the actors, and I think we are part of the setting up and establishing the priorities of the European Commission, because I think that we need to have a successful distribution of roles between the European Union and the member states. So. And also our initiative is part or tries to connect and to collaborate with the several regional initiatives that have been already set up in Spain. Here, for instance, in the Basque Country is one of the most active, if not the most active region in Spain in terms of Industry 4.0. And then through one of the working groups we have already established, which is this number 4 that has to do with public administration, we try to coordinate all the instruments and the measures that are established within each initiative. We try to promote best practices between different regions in Spain, and in general, well, we have this idea of coordination, and in the end, to have for firms and for companies the possibility of get incentives and get support programs from different administrations within Spain. No? So the idea is to coordinate the support programs we have in the central government with the support programs that they are in some cases in the regional initiatives. And aside from this, we also have established other 4 working groups. Just I'm going to mention very briefly. Number 1 has to do with skills. I mentioned the importance of skills in all this new environment, all this new scenario, and this process. Second group has to do with this new initiative of digital innovation hubs that also we try to coordinate, as I mentioned earlier, the creation of digital innovation hubs and the services they provide to firms. The working group number 3 has to do with digital enablers in our industry. We're working very, very closely with other parts of the central government that are dealing with it. And finally, the 5th working group has to do with standardization. This is not only a national perspective, even not an European perspective. This is a much more international perspective. So what we try to participate very actively through Europe in the international fora that are dealing with this significant and very important part of Industry 4.0, which is standardization. And that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and well, thank you very much.